Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel and told himself to stay calm, even though his heart was tapping a quick rhythm in his chest. He was leaving the office before sunset for the first time in weeks. Tonight could be special. He had a chance to wake up in his own bed rather than under the hum of fluorescent lights and the ping of overseas emails. His company had clients in 3 time zones, and lately he had been trading sleep for deadlines. He had not told his wife he would be home early. He wanted to surprise her. On the way out of town, he stopped at a neighborhood florist and asked for lilies because Laura loved their clean scent. He added a bottle of Pinot Noir from the small shop next door. The drive to their 2-story home on a quiet cul-de-sac passed in a blur. He pictured key in the lock. He pictured the look on her face. He pictured the two of them on the couch with the TV low and the dog at their feet and no spreadsheet in sight. When he turned onto the street, the first crack in his good mood appeared. Laura's car was not in the driveway. He pulled in anyway and cut the engine. Maybe she ran to the store. Maybe she was finishing late with a client. He unlocked the front door and stepped into a quiet house that felt too tidy and too still. He called her and waited with the phone at his ear. The call connected. Her voice sounded cool and far away. He said he was home early. He was smiling as he said it. There was a long pause that made him sit up straighter. She told him she would not be home that night. He asked what she meant. She said she had work. She told him not to worry and not to call again. The line went dead. He stood in the hallway with the flowers in one hand and the bottle of wine in the other. The dog wagged once and then curled back into a donut on the rug as if the room itself had told him nothing was happening tonight. Daniel set the lilies in water. He left the wine on the counter. He sat at the kitchen table and waited for his pulse to drop. He called once more. No answer. He tried to convince himself that there was a good explanation. He slept badly on top of the covers with the TV flickering strangers' faces at him. In the morning, Laura's car turned onto the street like nothing had happened. She came in with a small hello and said she wanted a shower. She did not ask why he was home. She did not ask about the flowers on the counter. He watched her walk down the hall in a robe, calm and unhurried, as if a normal day had simply skipped ahead without him. His jaw tightened. He told himself not to explode. While she was in the bathroom, he stepped outside to breathe and found himself standing by her car. He had never done this before. He did it now. He sat in the driver's seat and woke the console. The navigation screen still showed the last destination, an unfamiliar address in a neighborhood across town. He stared at the numbers until they sank in. He opened the glove box with a shaky hand. Among napkins and registration papers sat a half-empty box of condoms. The top had been torn. One was missing. They had not used protection in years. They had been talking about trying for a child when the timing made sense. He put everything back exactly as he found it and stepped away from the car. When she came to the kitchen with damp hair and the robe tied loose at the waist, he asked where she had been. His voice sounded like a thin wire stretched too tight. She rolled her eyes and said it was work and there was nothing to discuss. He laid the box on the table between them and told her about the address in her GPS. He asked if that too was work. The air went heavy and still like a room before a storm. She stared at the box for a long second and looked up with something like impatience. She said it was not cheating. She said it was gratitude. She said she had made mistakes at work that could have gotten her fired. She said a senior colleague named Tyler had shielded her, had spoken for her behind closed doors. She said he wanted something in return. She said it happened once and it would never happen again. She said it had been cold and mechanical and she had taken no pleasure from it. She said she loved her husband and wanted to move past it. She asked him to forget. Daniel felt his blood beating in his temples. Forget was a soft word for a jagged thing. He walked to the sink and ran the tap and drank straight from his cupped hand like a man who found himself in a desert inside his own house. He heard himself say that they would talk later. He heard the door close behind him. He stood in the yard and stared at the fence as if it held an answer. Daniel had always been proud of his self-control, of keeping his word, of earning trust and not spending it carelessly. He also knew that quick anger leads to quick mistakes. A clean break would be easy. Lawyer, papers, a quiet division. He did not want easy. He wanted something that would set the scales level in a way that would be felt and not forgotten. He wanted understanding, and the only language left to him felt harsh. He asked his manager for a short assignment out of town. The request surprised his boss because Daniel was a valued negotiator and not usually the man they sent to stand by an assembly line or babysit a vendor. Daniel said he needed to unplug from conference rooms and slide decks for a week. The boss nodded and signed off. A trip would be a cover for his absence and a clean alibi if needed. He booked a motel 2 hours away and drove there after dinner, checked in, and sent Laura a text that he would be back at the end of the week. She sent back a little thumbs up. The next day, he searched for community theaters in the city and found one that did small paid gigs with improv students between productions. He met the director in a coffee shop, bought 2 lattes, and explained the job. No insults, no threats. Only lines spoken in public spaces that would sound like gossip on the wind. Lines vague enough to deny, sharp enough to cut. 2 or 3 people, different days, different times, nothing repeated word for word. The director looked at him the way people look at something they are not sure is moral, but are sure can be done. They shook hands on a fee and worked out a script with gentle edges that would still bruise. Laura kept habits that could be mapped on a calendar. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays, she stopped at a bakery cafe 2 blocks from the glass building where her real estate firm leased half a floor. She ordered a latte and a ham croissant to go. On Tuesday, a man in a business casual jacket stepped into the space next to her and said he recognized her from the building. He smiled as if he trained the muscle for it. He said the city owes a debt to people who help move projects along, even when the favor asked in return is not in a policy manual. He took his coffee and left. Laura watched him leave with a frown she could not smooth out. The barista called her name. She walked back to the office and convinced herself he was odd and the moment would float away. On Wednesday, an older woman with a warm cardigan and a kind voice stopped Laura on the sidewalk and told her she admired women who were willing to do what needed to be done for the team, even when the price was steep. The woman looked like somebody's favorite aunt, and the words clanged anyway. Laura stood in the wind and did not know what to do with her hands. On Thursday, she skipped the cafe and thought it would reset the universe. She made it until late afternoon. Outside the parking garage, a scooter nicked her calf and papers spilled from her tote. The young rider jumped off and helped gather the folder. He handed it back with an apologetic grin and said sometimes secrets have a way of becoming neighborhood stories. He pushed off with a little laugh. She stared after him. She swallowed hard and her mouth tasted like metal. That night, she called her husband. The dial tone felt like a cliff. He answered on the second ring. She told him something strange was happening. He asked her what she meant. She asked if he had told anyone about their fight. He said no and sounded offended that she would even suggest it. In the middle of the call, he switched to video. Behind him, a factory floor moved like a mechanical ocean and forklifts beeped in reverse. He said he was working and could not babysit her nerves. She apologized and set the phone down and pressed her palms to her eyes until stars flashed. She knocked on Tyler's office door, close to closing time. He looked up with surprise that slid quickly into caution. She shut the door and asked if he had said anything to anyone. He blanched and shook his head. He told her he was not an idiot. He told her their firm had a zero-tolerance policy, and if anyone found out, they would both be out the door before the weekend. He told her she needed to get a grip. When she left, his hands were shaking enough that he typed his password twice. Friday morning brought a thin, cold sun that turned the glass of the building into a mirror. Laura told herself she only needed to make it to 5. She dove into spreadsheets and calls, and for a while her brain gave her the mercy of work. She was almost calm when a courier walked through reception with a giant heart of red roses and a white envelope on a stick. He announced her name loudly enough to make heads lift above cube walls. People drifted closer in the way people always drift closer to a spectacle, even when they say they are above it. The card read, "To the most extraordinary woman in this office from Tyler." Daniel had not planned that exact wording. He had told the director to keep the notes light and the gestures half plausible. The actor took theatrical liberties. Laughter bubbled and then died when Laura ripped the card in two and told the courier to get out. The office manager tried to calm her. The director of the firm, a man with the voice of a football coach, stepped in and told everyone to get back to work. He shook his head with a stern smile and said the place did not need a soap opera. He told Laura to take a breath. He made a quip about a lie detector and chuckled at his own line. Something inside Laura broke like a thin glass that had been held too tight. She shouted the truth to the room in a voice that trembled and carried. She said she had slept with Tyler once. She said it was excellent out of fury or fear or a need to wound first. She said people around her were cowards with small lives. A hush fell like a lid. Phone stopped ringing. Someone in the back put a hand over her mouth. The director sat down fast, as if the floor had tilted. Of all the timing in the world, Tyler had been across town signing a contract and walked in as the silence spread. Laura grabbed his wrist and told him to confirm. He pulled free and said something that only made it worse. The room heard enough. She left with the eyes of the office on her back and a raw sound in her throat. Daniel drove back on Saturday. He expected a fight. He did not expect the knife. It was a small chef's knife with a dark handle that she lifted in a shaking hand and pointed at the space between them more than at him. He said her name slowly. She dropped it to the floor when the blade touched the edge of her robe. She hurled a stool at the side window, and it shattered in a burst of small squares that bounced on the tile like hail. A neighbor called the police. The paramedics came with gentle voices and a blanket. Daniel told the officers his wife had been under extreme stress and drank too much and fell apart. He did not talk about the rest of it. He said the word help, and it opened a path. She spent 6 nights under observation. The doctor adjusted her medication and spoke to her about panic and pressure and choices. She walked the hall at night in socks and told herself she would start over and be better. On the morning of discharge, she rode home in a rideshare. When she opened the front door, the house felt like a theater between shows. Some of Daniel's things were gone. The closet had spaces in it. The garage had wide, clean squares where his boxes had been stacked. She called him. He answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded polite the way a bank letter sounds polite. He told her he could not live with a person who had broken them, and then broken again when the truth stared back. He told her the house was listed. He told her he thought an 80-20 split was fair under the circumstances. She laughed in disbelief and then reached for anger. She told him she would fight him in court and take half or more. He listened and then told her about the security cameras they had installed after a string of neighborhood break-ins. He told her that the footage of the kitchen and the knife was clear. He told her he could file a report if he had to. He told her to think about how much energy she had left to spend. He met her once more on a bench outside a small law office with flat grass and a parking lot you could cross in 10 steps. He brought copies of the listings and a neat folder with numbers. He spoke in a voice that never rose. She asked him once if he had orchestrated the strangers and the flowers. He looked down at his hands and said he could not fix what had been done, but he could arrange for the consequences to arrive. She stared at the asphalt and did not answer. They signed the papers with cheap pens and left in separate cars. The firm where Laura and Tyler worked moved quickly. Human resources followed the rule book. The director did not smile when he signed the separation documents. The email to the staff was 2 paragraphs long, and used phrases like values and standards and policy. Their names dissolved on the office directory as if they had been typed in chalk. Tyler texted Laura twice and then stopped when she did not respond. He went to stay with his brother in a different state. She moved to a small apartment with a balcony that looked at a tree she could not name and started sending out resumes that came back with "thank you for your interest." The house sold in 8 days. The numbers cleared. The money moved in the proportions Daniel had set. He used his share as a down payment on a smaller home closer to his aging mother and farther from the interstate. He picked a place with sidewalks and a porch that caught the morning sun. He found a rhythm that did not include late-night calls and neon clocks on a motel wall. He filled Saturdays with errands and long walks that felt like prayer. He said yes to a colleague who invited him to a backyard barbecue with neighbors and lawn chairs and the smallest dog he had ever seen. He took up swimming at the community center, slow laps that asked for breath, and gave back a quiet brain for an hour at a time. He did not gloat. Revenge had been a fire that burned through the room and left the smell of smoke in everything. Justice felt cold in his mouth when he said it to himself. He thought of the lilies he had bought on the day it all started, and the way they opened one by one in water he changed every morning. He thought of Laura's laugh from before the last year had stretched them thin. He thought of his father telling him when Daniel was 15 that the older you get, the more the scoreboard keeps track of what you can stand to live with. On a late Sunday afternoon in fall, he drove to the old house by accident. Muscle memory took the exit and the turn without asking him. He slowed in front of the place and saw a tricycle near the porch and a grill on the patio and a pair of small sneakers lined up by the door. He parked 2 blocks away and sat for a minute with his hands on the wheel. He did not get out. He did not knock. He watched the light fade and let it. He told himself that loss was part of the price of being alive, and if you pretend otherwise, you only delay the bill. Months later, he ran into the theater director by chance at a street fair. They stood under a string of paper lanterns and nodded like men who shared a memory they would not retell. The director said the students had thought of the job as an exercise in tone and timing. He said they had learned something, though he was not sure what. Daniel thanked him without shaking his hand. He went home and slept badly and woke up with a headache and made coffee and stood by the sink with his eyes closed while the dog leaned against his calf. He called his mother and drove her to the grocery store. They stood in the cereal aisle while she debated the health profile of oats. He pushed the cart slow and steady. He told her he was fine when she asked, and he meant it in the way people mean it when they are still sore but not bleeding. One evening in winter, he wrote an email to Laura he would never send. He wrote that he had wanted to hurt her because he had been hurt and that the desire had landed on both of them like a brick. He wrote that he wished he had taken a different road and also that he could not imagine accepting what happened as a simple mistake. He wrote that he hoped she found a kind therapist and a job with a boss who understood the difference between hard days and bad choices. He wrote that he forgave her in the only way he knew how, which was to live well without her. He deleted the draft. He turned off the light in the little office. He stood in the doorway for a breath and then went to the kitchen where the dog's bowl waited. He poured kibble while the dog danced a small dance of gratitude, and it made him smile for real. He sat at the table and ate a bowl of soup that tasted like tomatoes and salt and late decisions. He washed the bowl and set it to dry and felt, for a brief and honest moment, the weight in his chest lift. Laura did not vanish. People do not vanish even when their names come off doors. She found a job at a nonprofit that built small houses on empty lots. The pay was thin, but she could look at a roof and know it would keep a stranger dry in the rain. She went to therapy every Tuesday after work. She learned to sit with the parts of herself she had tried to outrun. She stopped looking for shortcuts. She bought a plant that did not mind low light and kept it alive. Once in a while, she drove past the subdivision where they had lived. She did not turn in. She kept to the main road and told herself she was practicing not reaching for what was gone. She told herself that starting over at 42 was not a failure, but another kind of education. She cooked for one and learned which leftovers were kind and which were not. She called her sister on Sundays. She slept through the night more often than not. Time did what time always does. It sanded the edges. It left the shape. Daniel met someone the following spring. Her name was Megan. She ran a small physical therapy clinic on the north side and liked murder mysteries and old jazz records. She asked him questions that were not small talk. He answered as honestly as he knew how. He told her he was careful now, and sometimes too careful. She laughed and said careful can be useful past 40 because it keeps you from loading the car beyond what the axles can manage. He said he would rather take 2 trips and not break anything. She squeezed his hand. They sat on his porch one mild evening, the dog asleep between them, the air carrying the smell of cut grass and a neighbor's barbecue. He told Megan that he had spent a long time trying to decide whether he was the hero of his story or the villain. She said most of us are the person who made a hard call and then had to live with the echo. He nodded and looked at the street where a boy learning to ride a bike wobbled and then straightened and rolled forward, legs pumping, a parent jogging behind with both hands open and ready but not touching. A life is built out of what you choose to keep and what you set down. That was the truth Daniel returned to when the house went quiet and the porch light clicked on with the timer and the dog stretched and sighed. He had kept his name and his work and the habit of showing up on time. He had set down the need to win every private war. He had kept morning coffee and the sound of rain and the small satisfaction of fixing something with his own hands. He had set down the game of pretending that nothing had happened. He carried forward a scar he could not see and a discipline he could feel. He carried forward a wish that Laura would be all right and that Tyler would learn something honest, even if the lesson arrived late and without applause. He carried forward the memory of Lilies opening in a kitchen he no longer owned. He carried forward the fact that sometimes the only way to close a door is to walk away from it without checking the lock twice. And on nights when sleep came quick, he dreamed of a house with a porch and a wide sky. And there were no cameras and no scripts and no alibis. Just the sound of his own breath and the dog snoring and a clock in the hallway that kept a kind time. He woke and knew he was not the same man who had once stood in a kitchen and held a box of someone else's decisions. He woke and made coffee and watched the steam rise and disappear and took that as a good sign.